Well, thank you everyone for coming along today to our press conference. Well, unless you live on planet Mars, you will know that tomorrow we have the official enthronement of Emperor Naruhito. The ceremony is being attended by dignitaries from about 190 countries. Now, the emperor, of course, once he gets over the celebrations, faces a long list of issues to deal with. The relevancy of the modern monarchy in Japan. Top of the list, of course, is the succession issue. There's just a handful of male heirs left in the family, and many in Japan want the succession law changed to allow a female monarch. The last time that was tried here, or was debated here about 12 or 13 years ago, it was resisted by traditionalists. The other issue which we covered in my publication this week is The Economist, that is the relevancy of the monarchy and the stifling rules that surround it. The person who's going to try and make sense of all that for us is a very distinguished speaker, Kenneth Ruoff. He has written a very well-known book, which of course was translated into Japanese, The People's Emperor, Democracy and the Japanese Monarchy, 1945 to 1995. It was awarded the Osaragi Jiro Prize for Commentary, Japan's equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize. So we're very privileged and honored to have him here today to speak. He's going to give a presentation, and then we will have questions once that's finished. So do give him the best of your attention, please. Can I remind you, if you haven't already, to switch off your mobile phones so we're not disturbed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David, for that kind introduction. I'm going to get right into this. I'm so glad that we were able to schedule this on short notice, but I'm going to ask you to stay with me for about 32 minutes because this is a complex topic, and then I'll be happy to answer questions for as long as possible. Now, what makes Japan's imperial house worthy of attention, I would argue, is that to a considerable extent, the Japanese debate and define the national identity through the monarchy. In other words, they debate what it means to be Japanese through the monarchy, and the definition of what it means to be Japanese is constantly evolving. If my country, the United States, had a monarchy that operated in society the way that that of Japan does, then we would be debating through the monarchy questions such as whether we are to continue to be a nation of immigrants. This makes Japan's monarchy a useful window into many aspects of this country. Now, I have long worked to disprove the notion that is so dear to the far right in Japan, namely that Japan's imperial house is unique with a capital U. I would argue there's nothing particularly unique about it. But at the same time, I have never found common cause with the far left in Japan that claimed for much of the post-war era that the imperial house was uniquely bad. For me, Japan's imperial house is simply one of the so-called symbolic monarchies that worldwide include those of Spain, Bhutan, Britain, and Belgium, among others. The recent abdication of Emperor Akihito should certainly be interpreted in an international context. Akihito was the 6th monarch to abdicate since 2006. He was preceded by monarchs abdicating in Qatar, Belgium, Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium. The reason for this is very simple. Monarchies in this day and age need to stay in tune with society. And it was time in each of these countries to turn it over to a new generation. At least the monarch thought it was time to turn it over to the next generation. Now, there may be some individuals here with memories of the wartime antecedent of the monarchy. There is plentiful wartime footage, for example, of Japanese ritualistically bowing en masse to their emperor. And there are the accounts of Japanese soldiers, after shouting, "Long live the emperor," blowing themselves up with grenades rather than suffer ignominious surrender. Additionally, colonized subjects throughout the empire were required to perform various rituals in honor of their emperor. Such heavy-handed imperialistic practices are still remembered with distaste in parts of Asia. But one of the goals of this presentation is to help everyone understand just how much distance Japan's imperial house has traveled since 1945, and indeed since 1989, when Akihito was enthroned. So the presentation divides into 4 parts. First, I'll outline the basic structure of the monarchy. It's not the scintillating part of the presentation, but it's a necessary part. And then I'll explain in depth the agenda of the Heisei monarchy under Akihito and Michiko. The reason why this is really important is that the new emperor has made clear that he substantially plans to stay the course with the model set by his father and mother. But third, I'll introduce some of the issues that do seem dear to the new emperor, and also touch upon the empress. And fourth, I'll explain the heir crisis that Japan is facing. So let's move now to the basic structure. Article 1 of the 1947 Constitution of Japan reads, "The emperor shall be the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people, deriving his position from the will of the people with whom resides sovereign power." Now, there is a consensus among constitutional scholars that there is no way to interpret the Constitution other than to mean that the survival of the imperial house is dependent on the goodwill of the sovereign people. This very much influenced the operational style of the imperial house in the post-war era. They must cultivate the goodwill of the people. This is why we can employ the term people's emperor. Now, a consensus also quickly developed among Japanese that under the 1947 Constitution, the emperor must be kept out of politics. But that's not necessarily an easy line in the sand to avoid crossing with a national symbol who walks and talks. For example, during a 1969 press conference when he was crown prince, Akihito said, quote, "Constitutionally, in a sense, it would be best for the imperial family members to be robots. But I don't think it would be best for us to be robots. That's the difficult part," end quote. As we shall see, Akihito was no robot during his reign. At the same time, imperial family members operate under significant constitutional and other constraints. They most certainly do not simply get to do what they want or say what they want, but as a result of carefully scripted symbolic acts, over time an emperor, or an empress for that matter, can have significant societal influence. Now let's turn our attention to the Heisei monarchy. The 1958 engagement of then Crown Prince Akihito and Michiko electrified Japan, wedding the imperial house to principles fundamental to the post-war constitution. The fact that Michiko was a commoner, rather than from the former aristocracy, wed the imperial house to the principle of equality. And the fact that the union was said to have resulted from a love match instead of an arranged marriage wed the imperial house to the principle of freedom or liberty. Later, as emperor and empress, they put their particular stamp on the monarchy and indeed on Japan. So what themes summed up the monarchy during the Heisei era from 1989 until April 30th of this year? Well, I'll introduce 6. There arguably are more, but I'll introduce 6. First of all, they were absolute resolute supporters of the post-war system. The basic style by which Akihito and Michiko reached out to the people was far more democratic, but their support for the post-war system went beyond style. As crown prince and then as emperor, Akihito made numerous public statements in support of the post-war system, leaving little doubt as to how thoroughly he was aligned with it. For example, in a 1987 press conference, Akihito stressed, and I suspect all of you will particularly appreciate this one, he stressed, quote, "When all is said and done, freedom of expression is critical." End quote. The most important keyword used over and over by Akihito was peace. It's very important that individuals outside of Japan who are trying to understand this country grasp that Japanese don't refer to the post-war constitution as the democracy constitution. They refer to it as the peace constitution. And it is especially important to understand that for many Japanese, their definition of democracy includes peace. Please think seriously about that definition of democracy. Is there any other pluralistic democracy in the world where people also define democracy as including peace? Perhaps we could talk about Costa Rica. They don't have any military at all, but it doesn't apply to any of the other ones. The second major theme of the Heisei monarchy was their efforts to compress the margins of society. Now, what does it mean to say that Akihito and Michiko sought to compress the margins of society? Well, throughout the modern era, so that would be 1868 to present, imperial family members have sponsored charitable causes on behalf of the disadvantaged. However, previously, this sponsorship typically took the form of, for example, helping to provide facilities that kept those suffering from such and such condition comfortable, but in a setting isolated from mainstream society. In contrast, Akihito and Michiko have worked to integrate as much as possible previously marginalized groups into mainstream society. For example, in 1964, Akihito and Michiko adopted the Paralympics as one of their causes. This may seem natural from today's perspective. I mean, my goodness, my hotel is the headquarters for the wheelchair rugby world championship. I mean, it seems totally natural at this point in time. It's a wonderful development. But it is no exaggeration to say that one interpretation of the handicapped in Japan at that time, in the 1960s, was that they should be hidden away. Leaders of associations of individuals with disabilities credit Akihito and Michiko with having fundamentally improved their lives by having drawn attention to issues such as accessibility, ramps and the like. Imperial family members have no formal political power, but they can have significant societal influence, which can eventually influence policy. Akihito and Michiko were tireless advocates of social welfare, so much so it is appropriate to think of them as the social welfare imperial couple. Now let me show a clip from an NHK documentary on Michiko to show both her special human touch and also the role of the imperial couple in reaching out to the marginalized. If you understand Japanese, in this case mildly formal Japanese, fine, but otherwise just ignore the words and concentrate on the images.
にこう回想されている。自らが深い悲しみや苦しみを経験し、むしろそのゆえに弱く悲しむ人々の傍らに終生寄り添った何人かの人々を知る機会を持ったことは、私がその後の人生を生きる上の指針の一つとなったと思います。両陛下は全国にあるハンセン病の療養所への訪問を続けられてきた。入所者一人一人と言葉を交わされている。
本当に腰完全にかがめてしまうというんですか、もう地べたにつくような形でね座られたから、これちょっとびっくりしましたし、あそこまで接せられるという。
Most Japanese became familiar with the democratic style of Akihito and Michiko, and also of Michiko's remarkable capacity for empathy as the result of coverage of their visits with victims of natural disasters that were such an unwelcome component of the Heisei era, and which, unfortunately, are so far also a component of the Reiwa era. For example, the emperor and empress would kneel down to talk with individuals victimized by natural disasters. The previous emperor and empress never would have felt comfortable doing that. The third theme of the Heisei monarchy was that they were peripatetic. They were constantly on the move. According to the historian David Cannadine, a term that describes well the present-day British royal family is peripatetic, or on the move. He stresses how this is a contemporary development. Quote, "But the practice whereby, on any given weekday, many members of the royal family will be found undertaking public duties in towns and cities across the length and breadth of the country is a relatively recent development, and it seems likely that it is connected with the near simultaneous extension of the franchise, or right to vote." Peripatetic is a term that also could be used to describe Akihito and Michiko and Japan's imperial family in general. In his opening address at the ceremony to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Akihito's accession to the throne, parliamentarian Hiranuma Takio noted with precise statistics just how peripatetic the emperor had been. Quote, "Up until Heisei 19, 2008, His Majesty had made 180 regional visits, including to each of the 47 prefectures. And including remote islands, he had visited 514 cities, towns, and villages, and had been welcomed by 7,700,000 people. He is the first emperor to have visited all the country's prefectures, while as crown prince, Akihito kept a map of Japan with a certain colored pin stuck, indicating into the map where he had visited. And then when he became emperor, he and Michiko switched to a different color pin to indicate where they had visited as emperor and empress. To understand the agenda of the Heisei era, to grasp the agenda of Akihito and Michiko, it's unquestionably necessary to analyze their travels. The same is absolutely going to be true of the Reiwa monarchy as well. I urge, the working journalist, if you can get your company to agree to let you do this and get permission to go along on one of the trips, okay? Now, the fourth theme of the Heisei monarchy was the totally relentless efforts by Emperor Akihito, but always with Michiko by his side, to heal, to bring closure to the post-war by trying to heal the festering wounds of the imperial era. There was no cause to which Akihito was more devoted than trying to bring closure to the lingering wounds from the imperial era. The previous emperor, Hirohito, in whose name the various wars were fought, never devoted anywhere near as much time to this issue as his son did. For example, within 3 years after becoming emperor, Akihito had issued formal apologies for the colonial and wartime past to both the Republic of Korea and China. But that was just a small part of the story. The imperial couple took numerous trips to pray for the war dead of all sides. And let me see here if I can quickly switch. Excellent. Oh, how do I make it full sized here? Play this maybe? There we go. Okay. Right, that's better. I chose this photo of Akihito and Michiko praying at Banzai Cliff in Saipan for the cover image of my forthcoming book, due out shortly from Harvard. It's available already on Amazon, although the Amazon the one in Japan has a very incorrect publication date. They say it's coming out in April of next year. It's going to be much sooner than that. And actually, I'd be grateful if you do quote me in your article if you mention this book. But Saipan was the scene of savage fighting between Japanese and American forces. The Japanese side suffered more than 29,000 dead with almost no survivors. The Japanese war dead, however, also included hundreds of civilians who loyally killed themselves in mass suicides rather than surrender at the site where the emperor and empress are shown here praying. So Banzai Cliff, they would leap off the cliff there. One of the things that's very distinct about Japan, this could be a whole other talk, it's still post-war in Japan as far as large numbers of people are concerned. The term sengo is constantly employed, and if you ask people, is the post-war over, many people will say no, and then if you ask them when will it be over, you'll get an incredible diversity of responses, okay? And so it's still post-war, and that's not the case for most everyone else who fought in World War II. Now, in 2005, the 60th anniversary of World War II, Akihito seemed to up his game in drawing attention to the suffering caused by the war. In April of that year, he and Michiko made their second overseas trip to Palau to honor the war dead from all sides. Then, at the annual August 15th ceremony to commemorate the war dead, Akihito adopted stronger wording for his ritualistic statement, wording that he repeated at subsequent ceremonies held on August 15th. Quote, reflecting on our past and bearing in mind the feelings of deep remorse, that was the new phrase that was added in 2015, over the last war, I earnestly hope that the ravages of war will never be repeated. Together with all of our people, I now pay my heartfelt tribute to all those who lost their lives in war, both on the battlefields and elsewhere, and pray for world peace and for the continuing development of our country. There is no term that was more associated, that is more associated with Akihito than peace. And he did everything he reasonably could to heal various wounds remaining from the imperial era. I also think you can make a strong argument that Akihito also served as a brake against the rise of the sort of distasteful nativistic populism that is plaguing Europe and the Americas. Now, one need only visit the page of the Imperial Household Agency's website titled Traditional Culture to be reminded of the imperial family's role as the protector, carrier, and champion of Japanese culture. But what was notable about Akihito and Michiko is not so much that they shared with their countrymen a justifiable pride in all that is good about Japan. Rather, what stands out is that the emperor and empress pointedly and repeatedly declined to lend their immense prestige to expressions of national pride that were not tempered with cosmopolitanism. Let me detail perhaps the most famous example of Akihito's having undercut simplistic chest-thumping nationalism, while at the same time calling for his countrymen to adopt a contrite view of the past. And by the way, I think this may take on much greater significance considering the situation between Japan and Korea at the moment. On the occasion of his annual birthday press conference in 2001, Akihito responded in dramatic fashion to a tame question submitted like all the other questions in advance. I'm not even sure press conference is the right term for this, but in any case. A tame question fathoming his feelings about Korea and implicitly Japan-Korea relations in advance of the co-hosting of the World Cup. He could have easily taken refuge in diplomatic blather. Oh, I have warm feelings toward, Korea, blah, blah, blah. But instead, he offered the following history tutorial. Quote, that the people of Korea and Japan have from ages past had deep interchange is recorded in detail in the Nihon Shoki, among other historical records. Those who immigrated or were invited to come to Japan from Korea introduced culture and technology. Of the musicians in the music department of the Imperial Household Agency, some are direct descendants of musicians who came over to Japan from Korea at that time and have inherited the music for generations and still perform the gagaku, or the imperial court music, on various occasions. It was truly fortunate that such culture and technology was brought to Japan through the enthusiasm of Japanese people and the friendly attitude of the Korean people. I also believe that it contributed greatly to Japan's subsequent development. I, on my part, feel a certain kinship, familial tie with Korea, given that it is recorded in the Shoku Nihongi that the mother of Emperor Kammu, that's one of the actual emperors, not one of the mythical ones, was of the line of King Muryong, of the kingdom of Pakche. King Muryong had strong relations with Japan, and it was from his time that masters of the 5 Chinese classics were invited to Japan one after another to teach Confucianism. King Song Myong, son of King Muryong, is recognized as the one who introduced Buddhism to Japan. It is regrettable, however, that Japan's exchanges with Korea have not all been of this kind. This is something that we should never forget, end quote. The kinship reference was flush with meaning when taken in the context of Japan's mistreatment of Korea during the modern era that was justified in part by the notion the Japanese were superior to Koreans. At the same time, I want to stress the obvious, which is it's absolutely incorrect to think that there haven't been efforts by the Japanese to reconcile, I mean, including by the emperor, okay? Very, very strong expressions of contrition. Additionally, the emperor's remark undermined theories of a pure Japanese race that were and still are bandied about in Japan by pointing out that there is Korean blood in the imperial line. Now, stalwart proponents of the concept of Bansei Ikke, which stresses the primacy of the supposedly unbroken male bloodline, would likely go out of their way to stress that this was female Korean blood, and thus of little consequence. But for everyone else, blood is blood. Akihito pointedly declined throughout his reign to lend his immense prestige to chest-thumping Japan First style nationalism. It is probably fair to conclude that he served as something of a brake on the development in Japan of the sort of chauvinistic populism that is plaguing Europe and the Americas. Now I'll turn my attention to the 6th and last part of the Heisei monarchy. Okay. Michiko was almost always by Akihito's side, reinforcing his agenda. One wonders if there was a comparable partnership as successful as that of Akihito and Michiko among any other contemporary royal couple. Michiko brought to the table skills that accentuated her public role. Journalists who have covered the imperial house cite her power of communication as well as her empathy for the human condition, especially for the vulnerable members of society, as factors that have made her so influential. It was going to be difficult for any empress to follow in Michiko's footsteps, but Masako has in fact surprised many and is off to a positive start. So let me switch now to the new emperor and empress. In many ways, we're just going to have to wait and see what becomes of the Reiwa monarchy, but I can introduce some preliminary points. First of all, he's made it abundantly clear that he's going to follow the model set by his parents, okay? But at the same time, he's also made it equally clear that he's not going to be a carbon copy of his father, that it's absolutely necessary that as society changes, that the official duties of the emperor change as well. And there have been two themes that already distinguish him from his father. He has been stressing the fact that Japan is diversifying, okay? And as a result, he's been stressing the need for tolerance, okay? He's really been hammering away on this point. And it's really important that people understand that the reason the imperial house has survived is not because of some stubborn attachment to tradition. but rather precisely because they've changed and kept in tune with the trends of times. I really urge all of you, I'm going to be very blunt here, to stop using this idiotic term traditional in reference to the imperial house, okay? You come across as ill-informed. It's 99.5% modern. There's this tiny little part, and even that has been substantially reformed over the years. So please, don't use this term unless you very carefully define it. Don't say, oh, these mystical traditions that they're going to perform. It's nonsense, okay? So, sorry for being so blunt, but it's kind of something that's aggravating me. The second theme that he's been focusing on is water, and I'll get that to that in a second. But Japan really has diversified in recent decades. People with disabilities expect to lead as regular as lives as possible. Women expect to have careers after marrying. There's an maybe emerged LGBTQ movement. But it's not just the lives of individuals already in Japan that have the lifestyles of people already in Japan that have diversified. Japan has the following choice going forward. Either the Japanese can accept that their population will drop by about 1/3 in the coming decades, or they can admit enough immigrants to at least mitigate the extent of the shrinking population. In fact, there already are many newcomers in Japan, and there could be even more going forward. But if Japan is going to accept immigrants, this will require a change in the definition of citizenship from the race-based, blood-based present one to one that allows for naturalized citizenship of large numbers of individuals, whatever their race. The main role that symbolic monarchs play is to try to cultivate and maintain national identity. And as Japan diversifies, maintaining national unity will be even more challenging. The new emperor seems to understand that he has his work cut out for him in this area, and he's already putting work into that particular area. Now, Naruhito has had an interest in water ever since he was a child, and he served as the honorary president of a very important United Nations Committee on Water for 8 years, and made what was actually a very moving speech in 2015 at the United Nations, where he stressed, "There is no topic of greater importance to our common future than water, nor one with deeper links to our common humanity." Now, interestingly enough, even after a typhoon like the one Japan just experienced, there's still a lot of Japanese who are baffled by Naruhito's interest in water. I mean, most all Japanese have easy access to clean water. In fact, they probably all do. What is it about this interest in water? But what Naruhito knows is that as many as 1 out of 7 people worldwide, that would be 1 billion plus people, get up in the morning and they don't know if they're going to be able to access clean water. And his focus on water marks a new departure for the imperial house. It is likely that in the same way that his father and mother devoted much of their reign to lending their prestige to the most vulnerable members of Japanese society, Naruhito intends through the focus on water to lend his prestige to some of the most vulnerable members of global society to try to make a difference in their lives. As for Masako, her popularity has shot through the roof since becoming empress because she has approached her public duties with zest. She is someone who from a young age wanted to serve her country, and in that sense the position of empress aligns with her life goals. But I know now that we can say with confidence that while Crown Princess, Masako did not appreciate in the least being treated as though her main worth as a human being was to serve as a womb for a male heir to the throne. Now let me just tell you about the heir crisis. Won't take long. It's pretty simple to outline, but agreeing on a solution is going to be a major national debate. The debate's already going on, okay? There is still an intense minority in Japan which claims that if you break the supposedly unbroken male imperial bloodline, then Japan ceases to exist. Okay, I've been in the same room with these sorts of people. But this claim is ringing increasingly hollow to more and more Japanese, not only as gender equality becomes the global standard in the 21st century, but also because without some sort of change to the imperial system, the imperial line is possibly facing extinction. Now, there have been enough male-only lineages worldwide through history that we now know that two mechanisms have been necessary to perpetuate them at length. The first is a system of concubines, which in Japan's case was abolished after World War II. There is no likelihood that the concubine system is going to be reestablished. They already have enough trouble finding wives. You can imagine if they were allowed to return to a concubine, I think that would make it almost impossible for them to find a wife in this day and age. The second mechanism is a wide pool of collateral families eligible to provide heirs. The number of collateral families was significantly reduced during the occupation when 11 collateral families lost their royal status. There are at least two ways to increase the number of collateral families going forward. The one preferred by the far right is to reestablish some of the families abolished at the time of the occupation. But this is fraught with problems, including first and foremost, it's not the least bit clear that any of these people want anything to do with this proposal, okay? I mean, the third, what is now essentially the third generation of them who've lived as commoners. And the other way would be to allow female members of the imperial family who now lose their royal status upon marriage to establish collateral families upon marriage. But the far right heatedly opposes this route because at this point in time, there really are no marriage partners for royal family members other than commoners. And what this means, or could mean, is that down the road, if the child of one of these collateral families ascended to the throne, the patrilineal lineage would be broken. Okay? The child would not have the royal patrilineal lineage so trumpeted by some in Japan. So at present, there is the present emperor, his 53-year-old younger brother Akishino, who is next in line, and then 13-year-old Prince Hisahito. The future of the imperial line rests on the shoulders of Prince Hisahito. He's the only boy among the current generation of imperial children. Okay? Now, arguably, the simplest, most logical reform would be to allow women to serve as tenno. But here, too, the patrilineal lineage would likely be broken according to the following scenario. A princess almost surely is going, who's in line for the throne, is almost surely going to marry a commoner because there really aren't any other choices. And if the child that they then have becomes emperor, then the patrilineal lineage is broken. The so-called unbroken male lineage is broken, so the far right is especially against this one. Now, I do want to point out quickly that there are very few monarchies left that limit it to the patrilineal lineage male only. It's basically Japan and a few Muslim countries, the most famous of which would be Saudi Arabia. So I think the time has come for the Japanese to ask themselves if in the area of gender equality they want to be grouped together with Saudi Arabia. So now I can't predict the measures that the Japanese will take to address this issue, but debates over what to do about the heir crisis are exposing various sides of Japan, many of which are not edifying, okay? For example, the far-right commentator Yagi Hidetsugu, who apparently is a key advisor to Prime Minister Abe on imperial matters, accused me and the Asahi newspaper of conspiring to put a mixed-race emperor on the throne by supporting a change in the law to permit women to serve as tenno. This was in the August version of the magazine Will. Now, the Amazon rankings of the Japanese language versions of my book shot up after Yagi made his accusation, so perhaps I should send him a thank you letter. But even many conservative Japanese found Yagi's historical accusation to be an embarrassing window into the racialist underbelly of Japan. For example, this is a book based on a 14-hour debate I did with Kobayashi Yoshinori. We obviously disagree on many points, but that's what made it interesting. Kobayashi in this book just rakes Yagi over the coals as a racist jerk, basically. And so the conservatives are not, monolithic in Japan. I think it's important to keep that in mind. To the extent that this charge rested on any logic, it flowed from the notion that a princess in line for the throne might have trouble finding a Japanese husband willing to play the supporting role. Maybe that right away tells you that some things need to change, and therefore might end up marrying a foreigner, okay? Their child could then end up as the so-called mixed race emperor down the road that apparently just keeps people like Yagi up at night. But what would be wrong with that anyway? Okay, what would be wrong with that? And I'll stop there. Okay, happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that fascinating talk. Well, as somebody who used the word traditional and traditionalist several times on my article last week, I can feel myself squirming on my seat there uncomfortably.
Sorry.
We're going to open the questions up. We have 15 minutes, I think, or a little bit more, to the working press table first. I see Andrew's hand up. And sorry, did you have your hand up, Rupert?
Oh, yes.
You did? Okay, so Rupert second. Yeah, Andrew first.
No, go.
Yeah.
You're working journalist.
Thank you. And don't forget to tell us who you are and who you work for. Thanks.
I'm Rupert Wingfield-Hayes from the BBC. Can I just ask about the position of... So the new emperor and empress, their daughter is now...
Yeah.
After much debate, because of Prince Hisahito's arrival, has now been ruled out for the line of succession. And I just wondered whether you have any insights or thoughts about how this has affected the emperor and empress themselves, in that they now are, the next in line to the throne is having had a daughter, and the possibility that she could become the empress, and now having had that taken away from them, and whether you have any insights on that.
I don't have any insight specifically on how the emperor and empress feel about this. I would point out that it's not completely over yet. They're going to turn their attention to changing, I think they have to, changing the imperial house law after the celebrations are over. But one really unfortunate side effect from them not having taken action when Koizumi was prime minister and when they did this serious study is that it unfortunately has become personal now. If they were to make a decision, it would look as though, is it going to be Aiko or is it going to be Hisahito, rather than it just being a structural decision. So it's very unfortunate that they've waited. But what a strange thing it must have been for Aiko to wonder, am I going to potentially be the first woman emperor or not? And even now it's not clear. And so, but I don't know. I mean, I imagine they're disappointed. I think that anybody could say that, but I don't want to speak for them. It's a very interesting question, but it's one that I just don't know for sure how they feel. Yeah.
Andrew. And then the gentleman there.
Andrew Horvath. Is this on? Yes. Andrew Horvath, freelance. Just a follow-up to Rupert's question. If you watch NHK regularly, you will suddenly see an enormous amount of attention being paid to Hisahito, also to the emperor's younger brother, and also even to visits to Eastern Europe by daughters of that family, and so on. Would you say that this might be the utilization of the public broadcasting system by the present government to get a point across to the public that this is really the direction that they would like to see it go? And since, as we know, the present Prime Minister is not exactly left of center.
Yeah. Well, I know that NHK has been in the news a lot lately, and because of supposedly not being as independent as one would like. But I actually have been interviewed time after time by NHK. That's why I'm here, actually. It's NHK World that brought me over. and have worked with numerous directors on documentaries, and some of the documentaries they have put out have been stunning. I mean, there's a recent one that's half about the Daijosai and spends, the 30 minutes on the Daijosai pointing out there's nothing particularly traditional about the present version, and then switches in the second half to the fact that Prince Mikasa, one of Hirohito's younger brothers, after the war was adamant that the imperial house law be changed to suit the new constitution, by which he meant allowing women to ascend to the throne. So NHK is, I've learned firsthand, is a monstrous organization, okay, with all different sections going in various directions. And so my interpretation would be that even if the government is successful maybe in exerting pressure in certain areas, other directors are going off and doing whatever they please, and the government can't do anything about it. So there's plenty of coverage going on about whether Japan should switch to allowing a matrilineal lineage. And here I should stress, it's not just the question of there being a woman emperor. It's tricky in English because throughout history, there have been 8 regnant empresses in Japan, and the term tenno is used to describe them as well, okay? And it would be used to describe any woman down the road who might become, who actually would sit on the throne. So it's not over yet, and we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out. But this intense minority is rabid and willing to use any tactic in order to try to stop the change in the law. And so, but the key thing is having one woman as tenno. That's not even necessarily a big deal even for the far right. The key thing for them, because she would be a patrilineal lineage, the key thing would be the next generation, whether it would revert to someone of the patrilineal lineage, or if her child becomes tenno, assuming she's married a commoner, that's when the lineage would be broken, and that's what freaks them out. And so...
Since we're, since we're on the media or NHK, let me ask you a broader question about how important you think the media is in the role of all of this. I ask because the incident you referenced to Akihito in 2001, mentioning the Korean blood in the family. I was here for that, and I remember that the local media gave it very little coverage. It was page 2 of the Asahi. I think Newsweek Japan put it on the cover, but several weeks later. Yeah. Whereas, of course, the Koreans went crazy for it. They put it on the front page and had it on the top of their news bulletins. I mean, I teach at Sophia, and I've never met a Sophia student who knows that story. I just wonder if you think the media is important in the way it frames the monarchy.
Oh no, it's hugely important. I mean, it works in so many different directions. The media is kind of the mediator in the middle. This is how the Imperial House members learn whether their performances are playing out the way that they hope. Okay, and it's also what shapes to a considerable extent the popular, views of the monarchy. Let me really quickly tell you a story that's actually very embarrassing for me, but it's useful pedagogically. When I was first here doing the PhD, which led to the first book, The People's Emperor, a longtime member of the Imperial House Press Club, I mean, he wasn't a member at that time, arranged for me to meet with Kyoto's present representative. And so I asked this guy, I said to him, do imperial family members read much of what's written about them? And this poor guy, he was a man of great dignity, sort of did how can someone who's studying the monarchy ask such a patently simplistic question? And then he went on to tell me they read everything that's written about them. There's a section in the Imperial Household Agency devoted to clipping out all the articles about them and then forwarding them to the particular imperial family member. So they're intensely concerned about how they're playing in the public. And so the media is huge. I agree with you that this particular statement has not gotten the coverage that it deserves, and I think it should be brought up significantly in light of what's going on between Japan and Korea. So I think it's very, very important for everybody to remember that Akihito did this, in addition to issuing a formal apology to Korea in 1990 on upon the visit of the Korean president. So.
The gentleman there.
Thank you. My name is Inuma, the Oriental economist.
Oh, sure.
I'm curious about your view on retired Emperor Akihito's devotion to imperial court Shinto rituals. Well, I think, as we know, that many of the important Shinto rituals are product in the Meiji period. With the aim of stressing the direct connection to the ancestors or goddess Amaterasu, and to give some legitimacy to the governance of Meiji government. But still, former Emperor Akihito is very diligent and earnest in serving, unlike his grandfather Taisho or grandfather Meiji was not so diligent. Like his father's latter half, he became very diligent. So, what is your view on his behavior?
I agree with you that it seems contradictory for someone who appeared to be, really was very, very progressive. I think it's tricky to say that he was actually, on the left. That's a tricky discussion, especially on the left in Japan, but he was someone who was very, very progressive. But it's absolutely true that he carried out the Shinto rituals with the same devotion as his father. And additionally, it's very important to understand that for all the progressive things he did, by the time he turned over to the throne to his son, Akihito almost surely considered his greatest success to have been preserving the imperial line, and that it was at such high popularity when he turned it over to his son. I'm not a big fan of these rituals precisely because most of them have not been reformed to suit the post-war system, and that makes the Jinja Honcho crowd, the Association of Shinto Shrines crowd, the far-right crowd, delighted, but at the same time it's highly problematic because most were created when the emperor was made into the apex of the new nation state, and that's not the case anymore. But nonetheless, Akihito followed them incredibly, participated in them, carried them out incredibly seriously. So, yeah. People are complicated. He was complicated too,
Then Rupert,
Martin Fritz, freelance from Germany. You said this is the post-war era is not over.
Yes.
It's a peace constitution, and Akihito upheld this peace as one of his most important tasks. Now we are going to have a prime minister who wants to change this peace constitution and replace it. Naruhito wants to step in the footsteps of his father.
Right.
Do you expect a kind of clash or confrontation, rhetorically or whatever?
Well, I think Naruhito's views of history and also the Constitution largely mirror those of his father. So through symbolic acts, I think he'll make that clear, but he can't say or do anything specifically. And so I also think, to be frank, that Abe's not going to succeed in revising the Constitution, which would be my read. I just don't think he's going to do it. And so, but especially at a time when this is, arguably the most controversial political issue in Japan. One of them anyway. The emperor has to be all the more careful not to do anything that could be interpreted as, entering directly into policy making or public, policy making, I guess I would say. He's not going to go to, I'm almost sure he's not going to go to Yasukuni Shrine, by the way. When I was finishing up this, my K-12 math fortunately came back to me when I was writing the section about Yasukuni. It has been 44 years since an emperor visited Yasukuni, okay? That is as long as was the Meiji era that so thoroughly shaped Japan, okay? And I highly doubt Naruhito is going to visit, not simply because of the enshrined A-class war criminals, but because the whole historical viewpoint of Yasukuni and that silly Yushukan Museum, which, by the way, is a very useful window into the far right, and that's the best far right bookstore in Japan is at the Yushukan, okay, which is why I go, because it's my job to keep track of the complexity of Japan. So if you want to know what the far right is thinking, go to the Yushukan. If you've already seen the exhibit, just go straight to the bookstore, okay? And you can quickly take the pulse of the far right. But it's the whole historical viewpoint of Yasukuni is so out of tune with that of the imperial family members that I think, even though we historians really hesitate to predict the future, I'd be nothing short of amazed if Narahito visits Yasukuni anytime soon.
Thanks. Ken, you've got to leave straight on 12 o'clock? Or have you got
No, I'm 12:50, the car will pick me up, so I'm okay.
Okay.
If you want to go on with
Rupert, you're next. Oh, Robin, sorry, Robin. Yeah, my mistake.
I just need to get a bite to eat, though. A quick bite to eat.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's say another couple of minutes, yeah.
Yeah, no, 12:50.
Robin Harding with the Financial Times.
Oh, yes, yeah. Hi.
One of the things that's striking about the Japanese monarchy compared with certain European monarchies is that it's much less sort of overexposed to the public. Their private lives remain private, for example. And I wonder whether that's sustainable in the coming years, whether you think it needs to change, whether you think it will be a problem if it does change. Because certainly in Europe, I think publics are not willing to accept a monarchy that hides away anymore.
Well, it's certainly broken down to some extent. The weeklies in Japan these days are willing to publish anything, whether it's even remotely true or not. So it's already broken down to some extent. I think that most of the mainstream press, I mean, they will criticize the monarchy at times if they think it deserves criticizing, but as a rule, they're very careful. I mean, they'll only criticize it if they're absolutely sure of the facts on which they're criticizing it, whereas the weeklies will just publish some outrageous rumor or something like that. So it's a little bit different, but I'm not sure, in light of the ways the weeklies have behaved from about the 80s on, that it's as absolutely different as say the case of Britain. And to some degree, it's also because the monarchs, I mean, the imperial family has helped themselves. I don't think these people are sleeping around. I mean, from as far as I can tell, they're just not sleeping around, which, you know, helps in terms of keeping one's, you know, standing in the mass media. And so if that sort of thing were to happen and the media were to learn of it, I guess we'd enter a new stage in Japan. I think that the weeklies would delight in reporting it if they could get their hands on it. But I don't think it's going on, which is what's helping the imperial family a good deal. So,
Thank you. Patrick, and the woman at the back there, you're next. And I think that'll be the last question.
Patrick Welter, Frankfurter Allgemeine. I'm just wondering about, can you talk a little bit more about Masako?
Yeah.
There was all these talks when Trump visited that was some kind of new empress showing up. She's blooming up. She's no longer the depressed.
Yeah. I would stress with all my heart that, and I actually owe it to my wife to some extent to in terms of understanding this. Ever since Masako was a little girl, remember her dad was an elite diplomat, she wanted to serve her country, okay? And she was already serving her country as an elite diplomat, of course a young one, when then her life went off in a direction that I don't think she ever would have imagined. But now as empress, she can serve her country in a somewhat different way. And she seems to have blossomed now that she's finally empress. And again, it's very tricky to predict the future, but if she continues along these lines, then, you know, I suspect she'll be a very, very appreciated empress. There are some things that are going on. I need to verify this before I feel comfortable with people quoting this, but for example, even, Michiko and Akihito were very progressive, but they're of a different generation. And just the other day, a Japanese scholar was explaining to me that often, they would go on some visit, and Michiko would be the first to get out of the car, and then the emperor would get out of the car, and she would basically bow in his direction. And Masako does not do this. But the key thing to understand is that it's not just because Masako is saying, I'm not going to do something like that. Narahito doesn't want her to do that. So he has a different definition of the sort of a relationship between a man and a woman. So he wouldn't want her, when he gets out of the car doing the, and stuff. And so I think that she will be a new type of empress in a lot of ways. But it was ridiculous for people to think that Masako was going to go in there and blaze some new path. The crown princesses have very little power within the imperial house. But now that she's empress, she can definitely do some things that will be different, and she already is. It's a different marriage. I mean, Michiko was an aspiring housewife, which is what women in the 1950s, that the goal was to not have to work outside the house, okay? Because it wouldn't have been such great work. The goal was to marry a man who made enough income that you got to be a full-time housewife, okay? And then lo and behold, her and the crown princess fell in love. And so of course Masako's background is very different, and that's also leading to a different marriage because Narahito himself is of this generation, okay? So there's all sorts of things that are going on if you look carefully. So,
Thank you. And this lady at the back, thank you. And the state of the imperial marriage, you think it's okay?
I think it's fine right now. Yeah, no, he's protected her with all his heart, which is what he promised at the time of the engagement. Yeah.
Hi, I'm River Davis from the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, right. Hi, River. We spoke on the phone.
Yeah. So. I was just wondering, as a professor at Portland State University, what do you see like the pressures from the international community in regards to the patrilineal imperial system, and do you see them playing a role in countering sort of the conservative movement? If you could.
I don't think international pressure will play any role in this particular area. What could play a role, though, is that throughout the modern era, the Japanese have been very concerned about, for example, their place in international order and whether they're being perceived as being backward or not, okay? And therefore, if large numbers of Japanese start to perceive and think that their country is backward because they don't allow women to serve as tenno, I think that could drive things to a certain extent. And I have to admit, it's not, I have my own views on certain things. I'm using the Saudi Arabia comparison very purposefully, and trust me, it makes Japanese choke, okay? I was in front of several thousand Japanese last night, 150 in the room, and then being broadcast throughout Japan, and there was basically a collective choking in the room when I pointed out that, Saudi Arabia is in cohorts with Japan and keeping this patrilineal man-only system. So, but that's more likely to have a role than actual international pressure.
Well, thank you very much for that fascinating talk. I don't know about you, but I'm very relieved that Ken has confirmed that the Japanese imperial family is not sleeping around. He, in that time-honored fashion, he's run out of meishi, unfortunately. So,
sorry.
If you want to do the meishi kokan, you're going to have to find another way, maybe email or something like that. But do show your appreciation to Ken for coming and explaining all that to us, and for being so frank and straightforward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you want to email me, you all know how to do an internet search, and at my university website, my email's there. So no problem if you want to follow up with email.